And what can you advise other countries to deal with the same problem we have in the Netherlands? So where should they start?
Well, the lessons learned is also just use your common sense. I mean, you can end-of-pipe solutions are always much more expensive than control at the source. So that's where you have to start, even although it's completely maybe impossible, because you have this complex political situation and international situation. At least you should try. The other thing is that you have to think beyond legislation. You have to think about the future. You have to think about what people are concerned with. People like World Wildlife Fund and Greenpeace, they were concerned with the quality of the sediment, and we had to get approval of permits for ocean disposal, and we always had arguments with them. So we said maybe you should try to join hands, and if you can clean the sediment and make a clean port, you will get the support also of those NGOs, because they want it. If you monitor NGOs, what they think is important, like to forbid cloth import in the port of Rotterdam from Bangladesh, to forbid the distribution of whale meat through our port. Today we can still do it within legislation, but we know that in future it will become more difficult. So you better work on it today to be prepared for the future. So that's also an important lesson, is learn to think beyond legislation, just do it, and then you will see it works.
I've been very impressed by your presentations, like them very much. But on the other hand, I realize that you come mainly from Europe, United States, and we are in Chile, in Argentina, in Uruguay, and are complete different realities. We don't have the money to do what you do. So we need to think in the future, yes. But I see, for instance, in Chile, we are now having a very strict regulation on disposals of chemicals, water, etc., etc. But then we become less competitive. Our mining industry is becoming less competitive because we have to comply with much higher standards than the Peruvian mining industry, for instance, or the Indian mining industry, etc., etc. Then this is a very complex equilibrium. Yeah. So that's my statement.
But I would also like to react to that, because there are like pragmatic solutions, and we discussed about it during the coffee break. You can do things 90 or 95% good, but it may cost too much money. And if you don't have the money, you maybe have to go for the 90% good. And then there also, for dredge material, there are solutions like underwater disposal, capping, isolation, and risk assessment, monitoring. I mean, it's not in favor of technology, but those are solutions that help. And if you want support for your project, if you make integrated solutions that you also show that you want to solve the problem in the end, you get more support also from your NGOs with a 90% good solution for the moment, because otherwise they can choose we do nothing or we do 90% good.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the same issue in that if you don't involve the stakeholders, you may be shooting for an artificial target that cannot be achieved.
Yeah.
You know, it's technically possible, but it's economically unfeasible. And sometimes when you bring them along, and it's an education process both ways, not just us teaching them, but learning from them what the needs are, but also then realizing that maybe lowering the expectation is still protective of human health and the environment, which is ultimately the goal, you know.
Please.
To any of you, or maybe to all of you, in any project that you study and define and say, well, okay, we need to address such a volume, this is clean sediment and this is contaminated, and we will dispose in a confined disposal facility, this amount and the other. Did you call, or in your countries offer a public audience? And if you did, what did you do with the what the people said. Did you answer them? Did you have strong problems? Did you have nonsense? Because people have no idea what you really are doing, so they don't complain about anything or what happened.
In Brazil, we used to have a public audience, so but we had this problem. Normally, people they think this is a very toxic waste. Even if the sediment, the clean sediment, to go to the ocean disposal, they treat it as a really, really toxic waste. And someone wish to. We have interest even in public. You know what I mean? It's really difficult to explain it. I am not talking about the contaminated sediment. I am talking about the sediment suitable to ocean disposal. Even this, it's not good for them. They think it will stop fishing and it come back for the beaches. So it's really, really difficult issue. We have a lot of public audience after the process is approved by the environmental agents. In the process of dredging, sometimes you have another audience because someone wishes the consulate, consulate.
And the contract.
No, promotoria, consulate. Acho que consulate. The public counselor, you know. In Portuguese is promotoria pública.
Sí, the
Yes. They used to ask to explain again all the time.
Well, that's important. There's a nice article in Terragagua I use at the university about dredging in Melbourne Port that people complaining. Bocalis was a contractor.
Yep.
And they had so many problems that they decided to open a web page, to a telephone line, to give answers to people, just to give them calm.
Yes.
And that's important also, but not only to keep them calm, but also to begin to educate them.
Yes.
Because they know nothing about dredging, and they know less about different qualities of dredge material. It's a natural resource, but many people doesn't know.
Doesn't
that.
know nothing. Yes.
And we have much more problems that the dangerous or the hazard the dust is. Es más el problema para el público que el peligro de la
Yes, we used to have the same. We have some problems with the fishermen. With all the time the dredging project, we have social problems, you know, to accompany people, explain the dredging. Oh, okay, we are starting dredging. Someone will just get payment during dredging. In some projects, it's correct because they have to stop fishing. Okay,
yes, that's right.
But in some, like someone very far from the dredge, I wish to have a payment as well. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
Very human.
Yeah.
One of the main things we see at public meetings is first they want clean, has to be clean. And you have to explain what clean is, what's achievable, not only technology, but what can cost effectively be done. And one solution is the early involvement, bringing them in and providing jobs. Everybody seems to want the economic part. So if you can show that you'll hire local crews, you'll train them, you'll use local people, you'll spend money in the local economy, that goes a long way to sort of build trust. And then they see that this will have an advantage to them. It's not a simple solution, but we had even where most of our projects have a public meeting with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. So they have this meeting, and many times people throw tomatoes and get really upset. And one of the things that they always want is, you're going to come here, do the job, and then leave us. You leave us alone. You don't live here. You don't work here. Your contractor, it's not really EPA, but it's their contractor, does the work and then leaves. But when you show local people are involved, then they start to tell their neighbors, and then they go to a school meeting, and then they tell a church, and little by little, people get a better feeling about it. So, and it's a simple solution and more cost effective for the contractor than to bring in all of our people from some other country or other city. So many times, just creating jobs and helping with the economy is one positive step.
So,
Question? Yes, please. Or maybe for Mr. Coleman or anybody else wants to answer. Is there, in your opinion, if you look at dredging techniques of contaminated sediments compared to dredging of normal sediments, it was said a lot that it's much more expensive. And it's always a much slower process. Is there, in your opinion, or do you see that there's still room for innovation? Do you think it can evolve? Is there hope that one day there will be techniques that will be maybe bigger on daily basis, bigger volumes can be dredged? Can you see it evolving a lot?
In general, there is always room for innovation, everywhere.
Can you see?
I don't have something specific in mind, but as Tito said, the amount of contaminated sediments in the port of Rotterdam is decreasing. And with having in mind that we should live in a sustainable way, and 50 years ago we just polluted everything. As long as we could get rid of the material, then it was fine. And maybe some countries are further in their development than others. As you told, it costs money. Yeah, you have possibilities, but everybody is convinced that somewhere you make the change to a sustainable life. So pollution will be less. Innovations are driven partly by amounts. If there's a lot to do, then you're looking to do it cheaper. So there are two movements. There is general innovation possible. On the other hand, there is less opportunity and less necessity for innovation because the number of contamination is reducing because we are living more and more sustainable. Where it ends up, I don't know. But even today, contamination in general is always small quantities. Indeed, unfortunately, in the US they have some big rivers with a lot of contamination, but in Europe it's becoming less and less. In Antwerp now, it's where you're coming from. They have the Amoras project, developed for treating contaminated sediments. But in 25 years they think there is hardly any contamination in the Antwerp port anymore. So they made their project for a 25 years lifetime for that one, but then there is hardly any contamination. The Slufter was once designed. It's filled up only half, and now it's a solution for ports in other places in Europe.
I think there's also something to gain in assessment technology, monitoring technology, adaptive monitoring, so that can reduce the volume to be handled in risk assessments.
But if you have a great idea, Jan de Nul will be happy with that.
If we have, as a practical question, if there is a threshold for contamination to consider not available for offshore disposal, for instance, of 1,000 concentration units, just for example. And so 1,000 is the threshold, and we have inside 2,000. And you load the dredge and move to offshore and dispose with a dilution factor of 1,000. Actually, in the environment, these fine sediments will spread, and the final concentration will be much lower than the threshold that is considered contaminated. What would be the problem of this solution?
It's a very theoretical question. Because nobody will, as you just said, about a sustainable way of living, and nobody will do that. But you never can answer that in one way, because you have 1,000 characteristics you have to deal with, and it's project related. If your idea is next to a coral reef, then everybody will say no. No way of doing that.
If there is no coral.
That's the fact. Every situation is different, and you have different characteristics and arguments to deal with. So you never can say this is the case. And there were some consultants in this room, and I don't want to get rude, and I don't want to offend anybody, but consultants in general have two main favorite activities. The one first is copy, and the second is paste. And they put conditions from one project into another project. If they're relevant, they sometimes don't consider. I don't know if you have, for instance, turbidity measures. If in the US legislation, there is now the 29 NTU rule. And I don't know if you know how that rule came to life. Once at the East Coast, they had to deal with turbidity, and fishermen came in opposition. And there was a bargaining between, okay, we put it on 29 NTU. If the level of turbidity doesn't exceed, we agree on that. Then there was a project on the West Coast. There was 29 NTU. Okay, we do it over here, 29 NTU too. And now it's in legislation in the US. But every project is different. Turbidity levels from the Øresund in Denmark were pasted in project requirements in Abu Dhabi. Completely different situations. Coral reef next to the project, why not there in Denmark? So, in fact, it sounds a nice question, but it doesn't make any sense, to my opinion.
If I understand your question, when this methodology to sampling the dredging characterization area I just presented were proposed from my company on the review of Brazilian regulation. When I present it at the first time in CONAMA, the environmental agents thought, no, this is a dilution. And I explained then, no, it isn't a dilution, because the dredging process don't take just one point, one sample. I mean, if I have a problem in here, 2,000, and if my action level is 1,000, I have 2,000 in here, and nothing in here. And if it's meted with the project, a dredging project, it isn't a dilution. And in Brazil, the environmental agents accept this concept, and we put it in the regulation. But it should be decided before, and together with the dredging plan, the environmental agents has to be in agreement. And I don't think it's a dilution. If the project goes to dredging in the same way you have sampled, because as you compose the sampling, it isn't a dilution. It is just the process, dredging process. And so in Brazil we have this option now. But the contractors normally don't want to go in this way, because they think maybe I will, if this is a unit, I get the characterization on this, and this it's not allowed to ocean disposal, all of this. And if I get discrete samples, maybe will be just this, not allowed. So until now, they won't be choosing the DCU option, but we have in Brazil right now.
I think a very good example of common sense, and also that you have to realize that there are different interests. Contractors have different interests from the clients, different interests maybe from the government as well. You have to realize it, and then they can be different as long as you recognize it. Yeah.
I have a question. In the example you just said, couldn't you just make a mix of the two ways of sampling? Once you find that in one portion you don't meet the criteria, then you could divide those in smaller pieces. So
You mean in discrete sampling or in discrete?
no. First, the sampling method you proposed
In DCU.
in DCU. But once you find
I-
that there's one piece that cannot go to ocean disposal, then you could do those in smaller pieces.
We discussed this in CONAMA when
Yeah.
we were discussing the regulation. It should be in compliance with dredging plan.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
if
Yeah.
you if
It's no,
yeah,
you,
if it's not
it's unfeasible.
operational, yeah, it's not
You couldn't
feasible.
dredge
Yeah,
small.
yeah.
Understand.
I have two questions for all of you. In Chile, we have a community participation in all the projects. I would like to know what did you do to appreciate them in the projects that you have worked, and what you recommend for Latin America to do to deal with it.
Yeah, I can start. I think early is always better. Don't wait till you think it's the time because it's already too late. People are suspicious. They don't trust when they find out things later. So start at the earliest point, even saying we're going to start studying something. We'd like your input. It's going to make the water cleaner for fishing and swimming, let's say, simple example. And then as you do the different public meetings, you'll see more and more people, get involved. And that's been our success, is normally trying early. Now, with that, you will always get a certain percentage, they don't want it no matter what. And you try to counter that with facts, staying calm. But at a certain point, they may never be happy. But maybe the others will either persuade them, or at least at that point, you're doing the best for the majority, of the population. But I think, very early, and then it's better to invite too many people than too little. So one of the projects that we have, the people that are most involved are on a rowing team, with the boats. And they don't want dredging because it's going to affect when they have their regatta with all of the rowers. So sometimes just scheduling the dredging around that simple common sense solution, that's all they cared about. They don't care about redistribution or resuspension. They just don't want to bother that particular event. But we would never know that if we didn't talk to them, So I think, we didn't believe that would be the most vocal group, but that was the group that was concerned. The other neighbors just wanted jobs and just hurry up, clean it up, So
I would agree with this, and that I would add that so you have to start early, and it starts with joint fact-finding, more or less. What do we need to study? Do we all agree on what we're going to study? And then halfway the results, and in the end the results. And one important message is as well to keep it restricted to the facts and not the values. Because facts are how many birds are at stake or how many mammals. But if you talk about values, it's how bad is it that the birds are at stake. You never solve that with the stakeholders. With the facts, you can agree on the facts. You do not need to agree on the values, because one bird can be enough for an NGO to be at stake. Well, we think maybe 1% is okay.
To confirm Niels' opinion, that every stakeholder has an interest. And I told in my presentation, bring the contractor on board as early as possible, but also all the people who have to deal with this project. And the Melbourne project was really something that went completely wrong until the moment that they went to the public. And what is your interest? And how can we mitigate your problem or compensate your problem? And if that's your point of your starting point in the discussions, then you know what you have to take care of. But is it really institutionalized in Chile when you do a project that you go to the public and ask,
Yes,
what is your interest in this?
We have a law that says 19.313. And that's they have some part that they make some totally obligate to the consulting to make a participation of the community in some parts of the different projects that we present.
So as I am from the South America as well, I have some difficulty to get those speaking from Europe or US when when I came in on an international conference, my question is, and I always think, how can we do this understanding with the stakeholder, even if we go with one person, or I don't know if our normal public are less have less information than European or American. I don't know if this is the problem, but it normally is quite difficult. It's quite difficult for us. Even if you go to, we always do that. My colleague Mariana is used to go to fishermen, do the presentation. We take care to do. You can't show chemical results, toxicological results, because it's difficult. But if you don't show, they say, why you are hiding it from me? Why? It's really difficult.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if los cucarachas is difficult. I don't know. For us, it's a little bit difficult.
I agree with you, because we are developing a port project in Brazil. So I gave some advice to the people how we deal with stakeholders, and I had a student working on the issues, and then she came back and they say, okay, Tito, they say there are no stakeholders. I say, okay, but there are turtles, and there are people that like the turtles and love the turtles. There are farmers which will get problems with salt intrusion, so there are stakeholders, but maybe they don't know yet. So maybe you have to do one step further to really find the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And not think, okay, nobody says anything, I can go do it, because that doesn't work. In the end, you will meet them. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing we've seen, but it takes money, is EPA will give grants, will give money to local community groups so they can hire a consultant, so that consultant matches up with the consultant for the project, let's say, and can break down the facts into a more understandable way. And then there's trust, because they've hired him with EPA money, but the contractor is not seen that the contractor is always going to be the enemy to some of these local groups. So if they have their own consultant and they ask their consultant, do you believe what they just said? And he said, yeah, it's reasonable. Sometimes that breaks it down, and sometimes they give $50,000 or $100,000, and that consultant to the local community stakeholder maybe stays involved for a few years, consulting as needed, but that's one potential solution.
Talking of the matter, I think one of the problems we have here in Latin America is lack of credibility at all levels. The government is lying. The consultants are lying. Everybody lies. So when it comes to facts, even if they show it on your face, there's a high grade of just not believing what you're seeing. It comes worse when perhaps the construction or the dredging is done, nothing happens, and no one comes there, okay, from now on, we start to believe to what was said before. That doesn't apply. Next time you go to do another dredging, the same problems arise. And it's really difficult, because the stakeholders, you seem to find new stakeholders on the way when you begin the project. People that up to then didn't put any objections, they come forward and come in and have a different point of view. So we work in the port of Bahia Blanca, and we have constantly this problem of fishermen, locals, more or less the same thing as in Brazil.
I can imagine that, because then you think, okay, they agree, it's a short-term gain, but I think you should invest in the long-term relationships. And but it's a long way to go, because you have to be very trustworthy. But we have lots of experiences as Port of Rotterdam, but now we have like an exhibition center, which attracts 100,000 visitors each year. And those are 100,000 new fans of the Port of Rotterdam. We never imagined that we would do that years ago, because the port is the port. You don't allow people in the port for security reasons. Why would they be in the port? But now we have 100,000 visitors. And like you say, we try to make value. So when you think about the port, you can create value also, of course, for environment, for nature, but also socioeconomic value. You can add jobs, you can educate people. And if you demonstrate it and you mean it, you will get much more support. But it's a long way to go, and it's not easy. For me, maybe it's easy to say how it works, but it's also learning by doing many decades.
Actually, the Port Authority has begun a few years ago visit done by little children from kindergarten and primary school, and just to show them what the port is.
Yeah, that's it.
Try to do what you were saying.
That's it. We had road shows. We make television programs. We have educational programs for women in the port. So it's very good to connect. And then you see it works. It works very well.
We hope then in a few years...
Yeah, I'm sure that's the way. But you have to be very transparent and open, and you have to know better than the public. Because otherwise, if you don't know, you better not think that you know. Yeah.
So, any additional questions?
We still have 3 minutes,
No one? Okay, so thank you all for coming, and especially for the speakers. It was a very nice seminar. You can definitely consider success. And well, I hope to see you the next days of the conference. And, thanks.
thank you.